Hello! This video is to try to help explain the philosophical viewpoints of Lao-Tzu. My apologies for the pronunciation, I do not speak Chinese, who is the first of our three Asian sages. So if you have not read that chapter, please do so first. Now, this chapter is a little unorthodox compared to the rest of the term because most of the chapters will focus on one specific philosopher. At the end, we get a couple that have a mix, but for the most part, it'll be one philosopher per week, one chapter just discussing that philosopher's viewpoints. But here we have three in this one chapter that are all worth talking about, and we could spend the entire semester on any one of them. So we're really going to be shortchanging some of these huge intellectual people. And the other reason why this is unorthodox is because they're all Eastern, meaning they're, in this case, from Asia, and the book goes in chronological order by time period, by philosopher, by the date that they live. So we're starting way back at about 500 BCE, and then we're going to work our way up, and by the end of the semester, we'll be talking about people who are actually still alive. So, Eastern philosophy, and I use quotation marks because we're not really sure what to do with it. A lot of people say, well, it's not really philosophy, it's more religion, and then a lot of religious scholars and theologians say, well, it's not really religion, it's philosophy. Really, it's just a very different way of looking at the world than how we tend to do here in the West. And the majority of our course is going to focus on Western philosophy. So here's a little taste of the Eastern stuff. And if you like it, I highly recommend taking a class in Eastern philosophy or Eastern religion when you transfer out, because unfortunately we don't typically offer those classes at Kish in the philosophy department. So Lao-Tzu is responsible for Taoism. And this begins our discussion with the Tao, sometimes spelled with a T, sometimes with a D. And it translates as the way, but it's intentionally vague and ambiguous. So here's a big divergence already from how we typically tend to think and approach the world here in the West, because we tend to like everything very clearly defined, very specified in a nice, neat little box. And we tend to want to focus on the end point. What's the ultimate goal? And then I'll figure out how to get there. Whereas Eastern approaches, including Taoism here, are a lot more vague and open into interpretation. They're a lot more about having to experience something rather than just being able to have somebody explain what it means and then you can fully grasp the concept. And it's also much more literally about the way, about the journey, less about the end goal and more about what we're doing in the here and now in order to, I don't know, maybe have the best well-lived life. So the Tao is intentionally vague, and if you can define it or name it or explain it or any of that kind of stuff, then it's not really the true Tao. Now, some of you maybe will find that frustrating because you just want somebody to tell it like it is. Some of you maybe will find that refreshing to have something that maybe is a little bit more up for interpretation, especially if you think in terms of the fact that a lot of people identify Taoism as their religion. So the Tao Te Ching, the book that Lao-Tzu wrote that deals with this, which is a fantastic book, I highly recommend it, is usually just kind of like short little snippets that can be interpreted in a number of different ways. Again, it kind of intentionally vague. And there's a reason for that. So when people approach religion or philosophy or any sort of system that tries to help us live life better and know what we're supposed to do and what our values and priorities should be, all that kind of stuff, whenever you kind of approach that for guidance or for wisdom or information or support or whatever you're looking for, you're coming at it from a very unique place and what's going on with you. So you might need comfort because a loved one died, or you might need, I don't know, support because you feel alone, or maybe you're dealing with a divorce or stress at work or trying to find your meaning and ultimate purpose, right? I mean, lots of various things could be going on that choose you to turn to something like this. And when you have a philosophical book or a religious text or something like that that you would find typically here in America, it might not really apply to your situation. So if I pick up the Bible at random and point, or I pick up, I don't know, Kant, right, who's a philosopher we're going to talk about later, and just point, there's a very good chance that that sentence probably isn't going to apply to the specific scenario that I find myself in. So it's harder for us to really kind of dig through and find something that works. When it's a more Eastern approach, because it's a little bit more vague and open to interpretation, it can fit and meet more people with where they're at. So you can kind of get out of it what you're looking for in a way that's very conducive that a lot of people really like. Now, the next thing that's important to talk about here with Lao-Tzu is a concept that you've probably heard before, which is the concept of yin and yang. Those of you who are old enough to have been around in the 90s know that the yin-yang symbol, right, which is a little circle, half of it's white, half of it's black, and then there's a dot of each color on the opposite side. Very fashionable back in the day, which is why I mention it. But a lot of people look at that, which is definitely sort of like the Western interpretation of this, as like, oh, there's a little bit of good and evil, there's a little bit of evil and good, and the two work together. And that's not really what's going on here with the original conception. So first, it's yin and yang. There's only a G on the yang, not on the yin. And on the yang side, you have characteristics. Your book gives you lists of these. You have characteristics like knowledge and power and dominance and success and determination and masculine and strong and all these sorts of things. And then on the yin side, you have things like weak, ignorance, doing nothing, feminine, soft, things that, I mean, if you show the average American those lists and say which one is better, I mean, a lot of people would probably say yang, right? Because those are the individualistic, sort of powerful success, American dream kinds of qualities that we tend to favor. Now, get away from this conception of good and evil, because it's not really what's happening. Instead, it's what's called a union of relative opposites. And the reason for that is they're not inherently good or bad, right? Good or bad are totally relative to the situation. So rain is a good thing if we're in a drought and a bad thing if we're already flooding. There's nothing inherently good or bad about rain. It depends upon the circumstances in which we get it, right? So most things are like this. Sometimes they might be good, sometimes they might be bad. It depends on the circumstances. So the idea here is that these two, instead of being good or bad, they're just opposite. And the relative union part means that they have to work together, right? The ultimate goal is to find a balance between the two, because they're both necessary, but not in the same circumstances. So there might be some times when it would be really good to be really aggressive and dominant to get what you want. And then there's other times that that's a terrible strategy, depending on what your ultimate goal is that you're trying to obtain. So the other interesting thing here is that even though we need both and we're supposed to find a balance and it's a union between the two, we're actually supposed to prefer, prefer yin and resist yang, which seems counterintuitive to a lot of Westerners because we feel like yang is, where it's at. Now, when you look at the yin list here that tells you to be ignorant and empty and below and after and weak and soft and all these other characteristics, you might be a little bit skeptical of this recommendation and say, well, how are those good qualities? Well, two ways to answer that. The first is to imagine being all yang all the time. And you maybe know somebody like this. And if you do, you probably realize how frustrating people like that can be to try to be friends with, or to have as a romantic partner or coworker or a boss or something like that, or even just a good friend. And if you're all yang all the time, you're probably not only going to drive everybody else crazy in your life, but you're probably not really going to be happy yourself, right? So Batman is always my stock example of somebody who's way too yang all the time, right? There's not time to sort of chill out and decompress and sort of allow things to happen. It's all about control and power. And this brings us to the last component here that I wanted to point out from this section of the chapter, and that is the idea of Wu Wei. Now, when a lot of people hear about Wu Wei, which, I mean, non-action, right? Like doing nothing, they assume that means laziness. Like, if that's the ultimate life recommendation, then, I'm just going to hang out and get high and eat pizza and watch Netflix and, who cares? And it's not what it's recommending you to do. The closest, maybe parallel that we would have here in America to this conception is maybe go with the flow. So if you try to control everything that happens, maybe you know somebody like this. They have their whole life planned out. So this is what I'm going to major in. This is where I'm going to transfer. This is when I'm going to graduate. This is where I'm going to work. This is when I'm going to get married. This is when I want kids. And this is how my career trajectory is going to go. This is where I'm going to buy a house. And then this is how I'm going to die even, right? Some people even try to control that. And then if you try to control everything in between there, right? Everything has to happen my way on my timeline. Somebody who lives like that is not ultimately probably going to be happy a lot of the time because you can never control all those variables. I can't force somebody to hire me, just because I want to work there. I can't force somebody to want to spend their life with me if they're not interested. I can't necessarily force when I have my children or if I move to a certain neighborhood if that's not financially realistic, right? There's just a lot of things about life that we can't control, not to mention you just might change your mind, which is certainly okay. So if you try to control everything and be that dominant and aggressive, you're probably, number one, not really going to appreciate the journey at all because you'll have blinders on towards the end point, and you're going to have a lot of disappointment along the way. The idea is not to be lazy and idle and not care and not do anything. It's just maybe a reminder to let go of some of that control, let go of some of that need to dominate and to be aggressive over our own lives and choices as well as those of others. And instead to just kind of allow things to happen to you and then respond to them accordingly. And if you do that, a lot of really interesting opportunities will come about that you probably never would have gone looking for and not even realized what a good fit it was for you or how important it was for your own growth as an individual. So everybody has gotten, that job offer when you weren't even looking for a new job that ended up being great, or the roommate that came out of nowhere, after the plans you thought were going to happen fell through and they ended up being a really great person for you to live with, right? The right one comes when you're not looking, right, is what a lot of people say about romantic relationships. As soon as you're totally fine being single, that's when you're going to meet somebody who's worth your romantic time and energy. Now, if you think that that's true, then that is some semblance of what's going on here, is the idea that if you try to control everything, you're either just going to ignore opportunities that maybe would be good for you to have and have a lot of growth, or you're going to notice the opportunity and reject it because it doesn't fit with your scheme. So if you can practice Wu Wei, sort of maybe chill out, let go of some of that control, doesn't mean you shouldn't have goals and work for them, but to make a conscious effort. And I think this is probably why yin is preferred and yang is resisted, because if you tend to lean more towards the yin, it's a lot easier for you to jump over and go yang when you maybe really need to accomplish a goal, like passing all your classes this semester or graduating on time or whatever maybe it is. If you're focused on the yang, it's going to be a lot harder for you to downgrade from that over to letting go with the yin. So both of them are important. We need both of them. We need to have a balance between the two. But we're supposed to sort of prefer the yin. And that's probably because most of us operate much heavier on the yang side traditionally. Hopefully this helped clear up any questions you have. There's obviously a lot more that can be said, but those are the things that I wanted to make sure I made it a point to talk about.